Alright, so here we go, Chapter 5, Ancient Rome and the Rise of Christianity. And the chapter focus, grow from a single city to a huge, diverse empire. So as we're going through this chapter, that's really something you want to pay attention to and be thinking of as we go section from section. How is it that they start off as this little teeny tiny city on the Tiber River and then grow into arguably the biggest empire the world's ever seen? So be thinking about that as we go. So the Roman world takes shape. The objectives, the things we want to be paying attention to as we go through. One is the physical cultural settings in which the Roman civilization arose. So in other words, what were some of the geographic factors that helped Roman civilization rise? And then what are some of the cultural settings? So what were the people like? What did they believe? What did they think? That type of thing. The second thing is how the Roman Republic was structured and governed. Understand the rites and religious practices that characterize Roman society. And then explain how the Roman Republic grew and was able to maintain its conquests. And so Rome begins as this little city in Italy, and it ended up becoming the most dominant power in the Mediterranean. And so when we look at these physical settings, one of the key factors here is location. And so we've kind of talked about that throughout, where many of these other city-states were located on rivers. Greece happened to be located on islands and a peninsula, and that is also true of Rome, except they have an even greater advantage. They are in the middle of the Italian peninsula, which is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and it makes them the middle of the middle, really. And when we go to the map on the next page, I'll kind of point that out and talk about that and the importance of it a little bit more later on. So the unifying the lands. One thing is that the people of Rome and the Italian peninsula aren't isolated from one another like Greece. Mountains don't separate them, and there's two very large plains that provided a great deal of the food. And so that's one of the things that makes it quite a bit different from Greece, is that Italy is fairly well unified. And the other thing about Italy, and we'll probably talk about this more during World War II and U.S. history, is the mountains make it so it's an easy place to defend, but a hard place to attack. And so there's a geographic advantage there. And so when we look at the people, the cultural end of things, the Latins are the ones who settled near the Tiber River. And the story of Romulus and Remus tells how the Romans believed that they descended from these two young men who were raised by a she-wolf. And they trace their beginnings back to the Latins, which is why their language is Latin. And there's a second group on the Italian peninsula that plays a pretty big role, and those are the Etruscans. They're Greek settlers who ruled the central part of Italy, and the Romans borrow a lot from them, including the alphabet, which they got from the Phoenicians, and to the Greeks, and then to the Romans. And then there's also this practice of taking auspices as well as engineering and making of aqueducts. And so if we look a little bit at the taking of auspices, an auspice meant literally one who looks at birds. And so what the Etruscans believed is that someone could read omens by observing the flight of birds. And they'd look up at the sky to see if they had good luck or if they were going to have bad luck. And so in ancient Rome, they pick up this practice of taking auspices from the Etruscans. And eventually, and down here is actually one of the most famous auspices, is the founder of Rome, Romulus and Remus, lived near the Palatine Hill. They argued over the exact position of the city, and Romulus was set on building it on the Palatine, but Remus wanted to build it on a strategic, easily fortified Aventine Hill. The two agreed to settle their argument by testing their abilities. and that's when one killed the other. And it was because Remus saw 6 vultures where Romulus saw 12. So Romulus had the better luck and killed Remus. So there we go. And from that we get the word auspicious. And auspicious means promising success, um, opportune, favorable, favored by good fortune, prosperous, fortunate. So that's where those 2 words come from. So if we move onward here and upward, the next thing is how the Roman, oh, sorry, here's the location. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So if we look at where Rome is located, it's in the middle portion of this Italian peninsula. And the Italian peninsula basically cuts the Mediterranean Sea in half. And so if we look at the location, it's going to help Rome control trade in the Mediterranean, and it's going to be a great place to send armies out in any direction. So that's going to help them control the Mediterranean Sea. So outline how the Roman Republic was structured and governed. Republic means that which belongs to the people, which in turn means people get to vote for some of the people in the government. So we have a democratic republic that's actually surprisingly close to the Roman Republic in many ways. And so here is a chart that talks about the structure of the government. It would be a good one to kind of make yourself familiar with. So between this chart here and the information structuring of the republic, you're going to be able to kind of sketch out what this government looks like. And notice the career path. People had to prove themselves worthy based on their experience and their abilities. So it was age and merit is how they got promoted. And people expected their leaders to show gravitas. And we hear this word used periodically today to describe the actions of our leaders or how we expect them to act and behave. And so when we look at what gravitas is, it's one of the Roman virtues, along with piety, dignity, and virtue. And it's translated variously to mean weightiness or seriousness or dignity. It connotes a certain substance or depth of personality. So they take their responsibilities seriously and they make their decisions with a great deal of thought. And when they do make those decisions, they make it with some authority. And that would be gravitas, this weightiness. So at first there's only 300 members in the government. They are from patricians, the landholding upper class. The word patrician comes from patres, which is the plural of fathers. The patricians believed they were descended from the 7 founding families of Rome, and there was one family for each of the 7 hills. And we heard 2 of those hills, Palatine Hill and Aventine Hill, and there's also a Capitoline Hill, which is where all the government buildings were located, and hopefully that kind of rings a bit of a bell to you. Eventually, what you may want to do is draw out this government so you know what it looks like, who's at the top, who votes for who, how many members are in each thing, and eventually I'll show you what the American government looks like, and so you can kind of compare the two. So the plebeians, the patricians are the founding families, and they have the most wealth. The 12 tables are a pretty critical moment in history for Rome because for the first time plebeians, the common people, knew exactly what the law was and what their rights were. And so these 12 tables would be posted so everyone knew exactly what was going on and what was what. Before that time, the patricians could kind of change things whenever they felt like it. So Romans leave a lasting legacy. You know, that's something you may want to pay attention to because if they are talking about legacy, these are things that are carried on. And you can really see this legacy in the United States in the fact that we adopt the word Senate and veto and checks on political power. So understanding the rights and religious practices that characterized Roman society, the paterfamilias was the head of each household and had complete authority. So those of you who are big fans of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? George Clooney's character constantly refers to himself as the pater familias, and so that's where that came from. And in this section, look for the role of women, education of children, mythology, and religion. And that's going to tell you the rites and religious practices that characterized Roman society. So really focus on those things and jot a few things down. So the Roman Republic grows. And how did it maintain those conquests? They began with the Italian peninsula. Rome's success lay in its loyal, well-trained army. I emphasize loyal because as long as that's true, everything in Rome goes relatively well. The moment soldiers are no longer loyal, that is going to be one of the things that's going to signal the beginning of the end. The legion is made up of citizen soldiers, so the legion is kind of like the phalanx. It's a military organization or formation. It's much looser and more flexible than the phalanx, which is why the Romans are going to be able to defeat the Greeks. They received some pay eventually, a small stipend, but most of whatever they made was wealth from the spoils of war. So as they would conquer and take places over, whatever the army took, they would divide up amongst their soldiers. And so the better the general, the more money you would make. And from a very young age, Romans were taught to be loyal, courageous, and have respect for authority. And hopefully you can kind of see where a loyal, courageous, respectful person would make a great soldier. So with its conquered lands, it treated conquered nations pretty well. What Rome got out of the deal was control over these regions, taxes, and soldiers from each of these conquered territories. In return, the conquered territories got to keep their customs, their money, their local government, and beliefs. Rome even went so far as to grant those on the Italian peninsula full citizenship. They were complete Roman citizens. Closer neighbors got partial citizen. In fact, some of them could even marry Roman people and have their kids be full citizens. And the good treatment kind of helped keep these newly conquered territories somewhat loyal to the Roman Empire. It ended up being a pretty good deal because you would get support and defense from the Roman army, so you got protection. How were they able to maintain control? And I would compare how the Romans did it down here to the other empires we talked about to see how they're similar and how they are different. Hopefully one of the things you notice is the emphasizing of comparing Rome to other things, and that is because the essay is going to be a compare-contrast essay, so I would start preparing myself for that. One of the good questions might be how did the Roman Empire or civilization compare to one of the others, or compare and contrast it to one of the other civilizations? And so that would be something I would be prepared to do. The other thing before I completely forget, because I almost did here, is this WHCh5Sect1. There's an ancient civilizations part, and I think I may have shown you this before, but it has ancient Greece. It has some of the other places that we've talked about, but ancient Rome has one. And so it'll talk about some of the things that we've talked about, the Romulus and Remus story. It's pretty well organized and it's pretty short, and it's going to go with a lot of the things that we're talking about, plus there's links here on the left where you can go into a little bit more detail about it, and then the citizenship. So this isn't a bad little website to kind of check out and kind of help give you maybe a little bit different information or just in a different way, and it lets you kind of explore a little bit more.